The church bell should not have been ringing. I stood frozen among the towering pines as the sound echoed through the darkness, slow and deliberate, cutting through the forest like a warning meant for me alone. Every local map claimed the church had been abandoned for nearly 70 years. The bell rang again, and this time I noticed something far worse. A faint orange glow flickered through the church windows, despite the building having no electricity and no visible signs of life. The light moved as though someone was carrying a lantern inside. I should have turned around and left immediately. Instead, I found myself walking closer, drawn by a curiosity that felt unnatural and dangerous. Each step deeper into the woods made the surrounding silence heavier. The front doors were slightly open when I reached the church. Weathered wood creaked in the wind, and a strange smell drifted from inside, something damp and rotten that reminded me of freshly turned soil. It was as though the earth itself had been disturbed. Before I could step through the entrance, the bell abruptly stopped ringing. The sudden silence felt even more terrifying than the noise. Then I heard footsteps moving inside the building. They were slow, uneven, and impossibly heavy. Whoever or whatever was walking inside seemed far larger than any normal person. The floorboards groaned beneath every step. A shadow appeared behind one of the stained glass windows. For a brief second I saw a shape that looked vaguely human, except its limbs seemed far too long, and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then it vanished. Fear finally overcame curiosity. I ran into the darkness of the forest without looking back. The entire time I could feel something watching me from the church windows. What I didn't understand then was that the church had been waiting for me. And by the time I learned the truth, it was already too late. Months earlier, I had moved to a small town surrounded by dense wilderness after accepting a temporary job documenting local history. The town sat miles away from any major city, isolated beneath endless forests that seemed to stretch forever. Most people there preferred not to discuss the woods. I rented a small cabin near the edge of town. The place was quiet, affordable, and close to several historical landmarks I planned to research. At first, everything seemed perfectly normal. The locals were friendly enough until conversations drifted toward the forest. Whenever I mentioned hiking trails or old structures hidden among the trees, smiles disappeared from their faces. Some would abruptly change the subject. One elderly woman named Martha finally explained why. She told me about an abandoned church built deep in the woods during the late 19th century. According to local stories, the congregation disappeared without explanation. The official records described a tragic fire and structural collapse, yet no documents ever listed bodies, survivors, or witnesses. Entire families seemed to vanish from history overnight. Martha warned me never to search for the church. She claimed strange lights appeared there at night, and that hikers occasionally reported hearing bells ringing where no bell should exist. Several people who investigated were never seen again. I assumed the stories were exaggerated folklore. Small towns often created legends to explain abandoned places and unsolved mysteries. As a historian, I believed there had to be a rational explanation. Weeks passed before I discovered an old journal hidden inside the town archives. The journal belonged to a deputy who lived nearly 60 years earlier. Its final entries described people disappearing near the church. The last page contained a sentence written repeatedly in frantic handwriting. Every line said exactly the same thing. The congregation never left. Something about those words unsettled me deeply. I couldn't explain why, but from that moment onward, I became obsessed with uncovering the truth hidden within the woods. My investigation began with old maps and forgotten records scattered throughout town archives. Most references to the church had been deliberately removed or altered. It looked as though someone had tried very hard to erase its existence. The deeper I searched, the stranger the evidence became. Several missing person reports described individuals last seen walking toward the forest after hearing church bells. None of them were ever found. At night, I started having vivid dreams. In every dream, I stood inside the abandoned church surrounded by rows of silent figures. Their faces remained hidden beneath darkness. They never spoke aloud. Instead, I heard whispers directly inside my mind, the same message repeated endlessly. Come below. I began waking with dirt beneath my fingernails, despite sleeping indoors. Some mornings, muddy footprints appeared on my cabin floor leading to the front door. I lived alone and always locked every entrance. One evening I discovered strange symbols carved into a tree behind the cabin. The markings matched symbols found in old church documents stored in the archives. Seeing them outside my home made my stomach drop. A few days later, I followed an overgrown trail marked on one of the oldest maps. The path eventually led me deeper into the wilderness than I had ever traveled before. That was when I found the cemetery. Dozens of gravestones stood among tangled roots and dead vegetation. Every marker belonged to church members who supposedly vanished, yet many graves appeared freshly disturbed. The soil looked recently dug despite some graves being more than a century old. Worse still, several graves were completely empty. Their coffins had been opened from the inside. As darkness approached, I heard distant bells ringing through the trees. The sound came from somewhere ahead. Against every instinct, telling me to leave, I continued walking toward it. The forest grew unnaturally quiet as I approached the church. No birds sang, and no insects buzzed among the trees. It felt as though every living thing avoided the area. When I finally saw the building, I realized the stories had barely scratched the surface of the truth. The church looked far larger than photographs suggested. Massive roots wrapped around its foundation like skeletal fingers gripping a corpse. The stained glass windows reflected no light. I entered through the front doors carrying only a flashlight. Dust covered every surface, yet fresh footprints stretched down the center aisle. Someone had been there recently. The footprints led toward the altar. Behind it, hidden beneath a rotting carpet, I discovered a trapdoor. Ancient symbols covered the wood. At that point, I genuinely didn't know what to do. If you had discovered what I found that night, would you have kept investigating or walked away forever? Let me know what you think before I tell you what happened next. Curiosity won the battle against fear. I opened the trapdoor and revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Cold air rushed upward, carrying the smell of decay. The tunnel beneath the church stretched much farther than I expected. Stone walls lined the passage, and countless candles burned despite nobody tending them. Their flames flickered violently as I passed. Then I started hearing voices. Hundreds of whispers echoed through the underground chamber ahead. Some sounded distant while others seemed to speak directly into my ears. I eventually reached a massive cavern hidden beneath the church foundation. What I found there shattered everything I believed possible. Rows of wooden benches filled the chamber. Seated upon them were dozens of human figures. Everyone remained perfectly motionless. At first I thought they were corpses. Then they slowly turned toward me. Their eyes opened simultaneously. None of them should have been alive. The congregation hadn't disappeared. They had never truly died. The figures sitting in the underground chamber wore clothing from different centuries. Some appeared remarkably preserved, while others looked partially decayed. Yet all of them stared directly at me. At the center of the cavern stood a towering stone structure resembling an altar. Strange symbols glowed across its surface. Dark liquid flowed through grooves carved into the stone. The congregation rose together without speaking. Their movements were synchronized and unnatural, like puppets controlled by a single invisible force. Every face remained expressionless. Then the crowd parted. Something emerged from behind the altar. At first I thought it was a person. The shape stood upright and possessed human features. Then it stepped fully into view. Its limbs were impossibly long and bent in directions they shouldn't. Pale skin stretched tightly across a skeletal frame, while dozens of black eyes covered its face. The creature's mouth split open from ear to ear. The congregation dropped to their knees. Every whisper in the cavern suddenly became a unified chant. The sound vibrated through the stone walls like a living thing. I finally understood what had happened. Generations earlier, the church had discovered something beneath the forest. Instead of destroying it, they worshipped it. The entity offered immortality of a horrific kind. The congregation never aged normally and never fully died. In return, they served the creature forever. The thing looked directly at me. Images flooded my mind instantly. I saw centuries of rituals, sacrifices, and disappearances hidden from the outside world. Then I realized why I had been drawn there. The creature wanted another follower. The congregation began moving toward me. Their dead eyes never blinked. Panic exploded through my body. I ran. Behind me, hundreds of footsteps echoed through the cavern. The entity's scream followed me up the staircase and into the church above. The sound didn't resemble any earthly animal. I barely escaped before flames suddenly erupted throughout the building. Ancient candles ignited dry wood with terrifying speed. The church became an inferno within minutes. I never looked back. As I fled into the forest, authorities never found the church. When I returned with investigators days later, the location appeared completely different. The building was gone. The forest seemed to have swallowed every trace of its existence. No foundation remained. No ashes remained. Nothing remained at all. I left town shortly afterward and never returned. Officially, nobody believed my story. Most assumed stress and isolation had affected my judgment. Yet certain things cannot be explained away. The symbols I photographed still exist on my computer. Experts have never identified their origin. The nightmares never stopped either. Several nights each month I dream about the underground congregation. They are always waiting silently in darkness. Sometimes I wake to the sound of distant church bells. The noise always comes from somewhere outside my home. Whenever I investigate, I find nothing. A year ago, I received an unmarked envelope in the mail. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the church standing deep within the woods. Written on the back were 5 simple words. "We are still gathering below." I don't know who sent it. I don't know where the church is now. And I don't know whether the thing beneath the forest is still waiting. But every time I hear bells ringing in the distance after sunset, I wonder if the congregation is growing larger, and I wonder how many of them are still human. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Grave Nova Stories, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'll see you in the next nightmare.